Hi, and thank you so much for being here today at TMC Connect. I'm Tony Bramley, Business Development Coordinator. And with us today, we have the lovely Melissa Thomas, Head of Compliance with Activecomply. She and I are here today to have a conversation about social media compliance in 2021. So our title was, Are You Ready? And I realized that the emphasis can completely change. So we need to decide like where we want the emphasis. It's like, are you ready? Are you ready? Or are you ready?
Okay, so option 3, most definitely. With like,
we are ready.
Grab the chair, you know, like.
That's right, we are ready to rumble. So anyway, we're here today to talk about social media compliance, and I've got a list of questions, and I want you guys to please feel free to add your questions to the list. So you can drop those in the chat or the Q&A, and I will read those out for Melissa. This is being recorded, so it will be available. We'll follow up with an email tomorrow with a link to the video as well as just some talking points. So please feel free. We want this to be engaging, so please feel free to drop those questions in the chat. So with that, are you ready? Here we go.
Yes.
So the first question, Melissa, I have for you is, there are all kinds of regulations out there for lenders. So, but how does that affect social media?
Sure. So I think that very often loan officers especially are out on social media. They're making use of it. It's fun. It's interactive. It's been around for a while now. But the connection doesn't get formed that social media is also advertising. So the same stipulations that apply to brochures and things like that when it comes to advertising for a mortgage lender still apply to social media. It's still advertising. It's still consumer facing. So really, to round things off, everything that has to do with mortgage advertising regulation still applies. So that means if you're discussing a specific, credit percentage, there needs to be APR affiliated. If you're talking about specific products, you need to have the disclosures that are recommended for that. And if you're talking about refinance in Virginia, there's a specific disclosure for refinance that you have to have on all those advertisements. The same is true when it comes to SAFE Act. So that means you need to have your licensing front and center. So that includes your personal licensing as well as your lender licensing. For some states, that means your branch license as well as the branch address. So there's a lot of regulation out there when it comes to social media. And it's a little sticky because it's not the marketing department who's building this out, right? It's individual LOs. And so that can be really tricky because not everybody's had that marketing advertising training. Even though there's a lot of potholes for everybody to stick in. And to that point, it would be good to make sure that your LOs know what the restrictions are and make sure that they're clearing everything with you before they're posting anything specific on social media.
Yeah, it sounds like there are quite a few regulations. So just because you want to be, everybody wants to be new and catchy and trendy and, probably changing your social media posts a great deal, but there's still those regulations that you need to be top of mind.
So true. And one regulation that I think that a lot of lenders, they know about it, but they don't think about the applicability is that each state has record retention requirements. So that means you as a mortgage lender are responsible for hanging on to all the mortgage advertising you do for 2, 3, 4 years. I think places like Nevada are indefinitely. That can be really difficult to capture all of that content, especially when you're not the one making it. LOs are finding it, they're sharing it. It's not necessarily representative of what you as a lender offer. Maybe it's a pesky infographic that says, here's the 3 steps to closing, when then that's not necessarily true. Or it's talking about pre-approval and pre-qualification, when that might not be something that you offer. And so there's all kinds of regulatory issues out there, including hanging on and archiving all of that information, being prepared to look for instances of issues where, UDAP is concerned, or MAP, as well as TILA, and most importantly, I think right now is RESPA is a big concern as well as fair lending. So looking out for those RESPA concerns with kickbacks, regulators are out there looking for the same realtor being shared over and over again, right? The same builder being spoken to. And then, looking for those TILA violations, those UDAP violations. where those specific disclosures are important. And then fair lending, I think, is going to be a big topic of discussion this year in particular.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I've already seen the change. You know, it was coming last year, but because of all the volume, you know, it just hadn't made it the big necessity for the conversation. But I definitely see it as happening this year.
And to that point, production heights have soared, and we know that lender partners have gotten really, really busy. But you know who also is staying busy is regulators. You know, they're out there and they're looking. And one of the things that's foremost available to them, as opposed to them making requests for documents from your company, is that public information on social media. So very often a regulator will come to a lender and say, hey, we're doing, you know, this examination. Here's what I'm asking of you around social media. But they already have a list of violations. They've already pulled that up and are ready to talk to you about it before they send that over. That's what we see most of the time.
Until those public Facebook pages.
No, out there and in the ether that maybe you didn't know about.
Right. So on that note, so code of conduct. Can a lender have a code of conduct around social media? And if so, you know, where should they start? What should it be?
Absolutely. So, you know, we get this question from time to time about a code of conduct or a social media policy. And I think very often what we're finding is that lenders have something, it's small, maybe it's baked into an employment agreement or a small segment of the marketing agreement that very basically says, don't do the stupid things, please and thank you. And that's great.
You
that's
wish you
a
could
great
stop
base.
with that.
Yeah,
That
like,
would be great.
check.
Just don't be stupid.
Yeah. But part of the requirements as a lender is that you're supposed to provide guidance to your sales force saying, you know, here's simple do's and don'ts. Here's some policies that we as a lender don't agree with based on, you know, our risk tolerance level. So what we're finding is that you should be a little bit more specific about things, giving specific examples or talking about specific social media platforms, which ones you allow, which ones you don't allow. Do you have a point of contact if a person wants to potentially engage in a new social media platform? Who do they talk to? What's the process for that platform getting approved in your system? Do you know everything about that platform to begin with to allow it? For example, something that we've seen rising in the mortgage industry is a platform called Alignable. And we have that included in our Activecomply system. We scan for it, we find it. But we'll have lender partners come on as prospects and we do the demo and they had no idea that this platform was out there.
Isn't that the LinkedIn? That's the LinkedIn.
It's
Instagram,
similar. It's similar. So Alignable is very simply a small business referral website. And that word referral really makes me itchy as a compliance person, because there's all kinds of issues around that word and the implications, especially with RESPA. So what happens is that an LO very often gets invited by a realtor buddy, says, hey, join me on this new social media. So they sign up. One of the segments on Alignable says, who's your ideal customer? And this is just free form text. So now we're seeing instances of LOs who are talking about specific demographic information. Like, I like helping single moms find the best product out there for them and their family so that they can keep trucking on. That could be a fair lending issue. Or I really like servicing these parts of town or these specific zip codes. And then there's a redlining issue potentially there. We're also seeing that it's a highly contagious social media. And what we mean by that is that the way that the process works is you sign up as an LO and it says, hey, do you just maybe want to invite your whole inbox? And an LO very simply is like, yeah, sure, why not? I like people. Click. And then 2,000 emails go out, right? So now suddenly you've got processors and underwriters signing up for this website saying, my business is this, you know, my ideal customer is this, contact me here to learn more about these loan services. Now you've got unlicensed activity out and about there. Wow. So some social media to that point is a little bit more concerning to the industry than other ones, like Instagram, where you just share a photo, maybe it's food, maybe it's a baby, maybe it's a mortgage infographic, things where personal and business gets mixed. So it's important to know what social media you're talking about before you approve it. Definitely do a little bit of research. And then, you know, see the pitfalls before they happen and try to prevent that with your policy.
Yeah, that's, And I can't even imagine that it's an ever-growing list, right?
Ever growing.
I'd never heard of Alignable before. Clubhouse is out there where you
Yes.
end up just spotlighting yourself, and all of a sudden you're on a webinar talking about something. So yeah, it's I can't imagine how often those things change.
And they're just popping up, and then some, that were out there, like Parlor, sometimes go away. And in the wake of that fall, 5 more pop up to house that audience. So it can be really difficult for a mortgage lender to stay in the know and even know what platforms are being used or are important. You've got so many other things to worry about, like answering exams or dealing with dumpster fires in your company, right?
Right. Well, so Activecomply is a software provider. So how do you help lenders track all of this? Because, as we've discussed, you can't possibly do it successfully manually, I wouldn't think.
I think that very often lender partners do start manually, at least in the
Right.
beginning, especially if they're a manageable size. If you have 50 LOs, and most of them are older, maybe they haven't utilized social media, that might be manageable. But we've had quite a bit of business in the past year, one, thanks to the pandemic, because so many people had to go online to do a lot of these meetings and the advertising, can't meet up with the realtor buddies or go to your builder. So you do a lot of that self-promotion through the tools that you have, which is social media. Another big reason that we've had an increase is because business has been so good. So that means we're seeing huge growth in lender partners, who used to have 50 LOs are now at 200 LOs. And that's quite the increase. And I guarantee the marketing and compliance departments are just barely keeping up with whatever else is going on in their departments. And so very often social media falls to the back burner until a regulator comes, right? So we very often see lender partners come to us, one, if they've had a huge increase in business, or two, if they've had a scary or near scare interaction with a regulator, and they're looking to meet that checkbox and have some peace of mind. So the way that Activecomply works is that we go out and we find social media automatically. So very often we're finding those social media accounts that lenders didn't know about, like Alignable, and we're pulling them into one unified platform. We don't need LO buy-in. So very often we find stuff that maybe was more personal and the LO didn't want to be found, and it wasn't necessarily business related, but you put your NMLS ID on there. So now it's business related.
Right.
So we find it, we pull it into the unified platform, and then you as a lender would get to decide, yes, I want to add this to the system. We're going to look at the post content and scan it for mortgage advertising. And then if we find that in the post, we're going to capture it. One of the ways that we help save lenders time is we sift through a lot of the normal stuff on social media. So I know that Ryan, is looking forward to that gender reveal. Way to go, Ryan. That might be something that's not mortgage related. However, fantastic. It doesn't need to be in the archive per se for a regulator. And a lot of content on social media is personal just by nature. So one of the ways that we help is we sift through a lot of the normalness of social media and pull out that mortgage advertising. When we find it, we flag it for lender review. They get to decide if it's a problem and why. And then we automatically archive it so that when the regulator comes down the line and says, give me the last 2 years of social media content, you can just simply shoot us an email and we'll extract that for you. And that's post content, but we're also looking at profile content. Is the profile regulatory compliant? Is the NMLS ID on there? Is equal housing logo or verbiage present somewhere on the profile? One benefit to Activecomply is that we offer image scanning. So we're looking at those infographics, right? Because very often social media is just a picture being shared back and forth, right? So we pick that up with our OCR technology. And we're also looking at those cover photos that are on some social media for equal housing logo as well as NMLS ID. So we'll catch it there, because if a regulator finds that compliant, so should we. We don't want to give you a false positive there. So we'll scan the profile for those 2 basic items that we see are the low-hanging fruit for regulators, because social media profiles are really electronic business cards. And you might get lucky with a post that was not so great. It might get buried and a regulator might not see it, but they're going to see the profile and if it's up to snuff. We also very often have lender partners who have specific company outlines that they require. So for example, something we often see is a lender partner will say, oh, I have a standard disclosure that's required in the about section of every social media profile. Activecomply can scan for that and let you know if it's missing.
Make sure it's there. Yeah.
Make sure it's there so that you're covered. We can also look for specific links. So lender partners very often will say, it's part of my social media policy that our privacy policy link, our legal licensing link, our disclosures link be included on the profile somewhere. So we can scan for that as well. So it's all based on lenders' risk tolerance level and what their requirements are. We also scan for things that are a little bit outside of the norm. So, we're looking at the social media and we're looking at the profile and the post content, but we also want to know, where are they sending your consumers? So what's the website that's listed on the social media account? This is very often where we find those rogue GoDaddy websites, right? Where, this LO has done business this way for 20 years and they're, they get all of their leads through here. It links to their personal Gmail. They're collecting personal consumer information. If I don't hear some screams on the other side of this, like, why?
You're doing what?
Exactly. So, those are just some of the ways we help through automation, because, you should only care about the things that are related to mortgage advertising. And we know that your time is precious. So we also make it easy for you to know as soon as something's available. We have automated email notifications that you can turn on so that as soon as something issue-worthy does come up. You don't have to live in the platform. Sorry, that was a long monologue.
No, that's exactly what I was looking for. So I'm going to stop here and just remind our audience that you're on TNC Connect. This is Melissa Thomas with Activecomply. She's head of compliance, and we are discussing, are you ready for compliance 2021? And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat box, and we will answer those post haste. Our next question is about risk management, which we were just talking about. So, what are some of the best practices that lenders can utilize to minimize their risk?
Sure. So heading back to that low-hanging fruit, right? Missing the essentials on a profile. Some states have specific outlines that talk about, having your company name somewhere on the profile, having your website available or something like that. A great way that a lot of lender partners meet a lot of standard requirements is through the use of cover photos. So it would be ideal if you as a lender could have some sort of content library where your marketing team has developed, here's 6 options of cover photo templates available to our LOs. We can customize them to include your personal NMLS. We're gonna have our company NMLS, our website listed on it. That way you hit these check boxes automatically so that, if something's missed in the about section, it's up there, we're good, we're covered, or doubly covered if you include it in a standard disclosure in the about section. So cover photos are a great way to do that. One issue is that not all social media has a cover photo spot. For instance, Instagram, I think, doesn't have a cover photo spot. And it also gives you limited space. So not all social media is made the same, right?
Okay.
So for some of those other options, I think Twitter is very similar. What a lot of lender partners are taking advantage of is something called Linktree. If anyone's not familiar, what Linktree is it's a singular link that takes the consumer to a whole bunch of links, like your privacy policy, your legal licensing, your disclosures, your application portal, your main company domain website about section. And it's a really great way for you to make use of social media while still meeting that one click away option. And we had a discussion about this today that not everybody's familiar with the one click away rule. Now, it's important to note that a lot of times regulators differ on some of these topics because it's emerging issues, emerging regulation. But generally, one way to defend yourself is to say, Instagram only gives me so much space. I couldn't necessarily fit my privacy policy on to this California, one of the states that talks about that. But we do have this Linktree link in there that, provides everything that a consumer would need. It's only one click away from the advertisement. So that's what we mean by one click away, is if the standard disclosures or something is reasonably available to the consumer, then you have a stronger argument saying, you know, I've done my best to be in compliance and to not be deceptive with the consumer. Another big one for a lot of lender partners that they generally take into account is when you have somebody come into your company and you're onboarding new LOs, take the time to build out social media with them. Very often, you know, they want to make social media when they're halfway through their life with you and they just build it and they don't tell you. It would be good to take that extra step and, you know, try to make it where you can be some sort of administrator on an account. We see this very often for Facebook business pages specifically, where if there's a regulatory update, instead of hassling the LO as they're trying to go out there and win a book of business, instead you can make that update for them. You'll know that you're in compliance because you're able to simplify that process. So having that as part of your onboarding process, and if they do have existing social media, to get that list of URLs from them. Activecomply is going to find social media with your branding automatically, so we don't necessarily need a list of URLs, but it's great to have those on file to say, you know, what sites are out there in the ether that this LO is making use of that maybe they're going to forget to tell me about. It's just great to have some record keeping about new LOs as they come in. So that's my recommendation.
When I remember too, you said that in some instances you find that leads are being delivered to old accounts
Yes.
because they haven't been updated, which nobody nobody wants that.
Oh, I know. And one big issue with social media that really is the scourge, I think, for most marketing and compliance departments is these defunct accounts that used to belong to an employee and that employee no longer works here. Or your new employee who now works with you used to work for a competitor and that particular social media account belongs to the competitor. So how do you get that updated? So Activecomply has help docs all about this process, but very often there's a really easy way to deal with these accounts depending on the platform. So for example, if you have a defunct Facebook account, what it really comes down to is, do you own the trademark rights? Is this a case of trademark infringement? And if you as a lender can prove, yes, I work for this lender, yes, this is our trademark, here's paperwork showing that we own it. You know, it can sometimes be a 2-week process just to get those updated. Sometimes it's a 2-month process, depending on which social media platform you're just discussing with. So those can be really difficult. And I will say, it's really hard to get anything review related on social media taken down. So if a lender is trying to remove a Yelp page, it's near to impossible to get that rectified, because very often, you know, Yelp will say, too bad, so sad. This is a he said, she said instance issue. And so what they'll say is, you know, it's just going to be out there. The best you can do is get a customer service rep to make some responses where you've attempted to rectify the situation on your end, even though you can't get the account removed. You can also claim those Yelp accounts that might be out there. There is some stipulations to keep in mind, though. There are, for instance, for those who may not know, Yelp has a claimed and an unclaimed version of social media out there. So claimed is where the business has taken control and they said, yes, this is an official business, it's my business account. To that point, if you claim it, you should also make it regulatory compliant. You need to make sure the appropriate disclosures are on there, your NMLS ID, for example. If you don't claim a profile, regulators are somewhat understanding. They know that you're not going to be responsible for all of the social media that's out there in the ether. You didn't make this account necessarily. Some consumer might have made it. So to that point, you don't have to be responsible from a regulatory standpoint, but you're really going to miss out if there's some sort of brand issue where a consumer has made a complaint, especially if it's about fair lending. You're going to want to respond to those. So it might behoove you to claim those accounts, even though there's a little bit more legwork.
Well, and I think we have I'm sorry if you noticed that I disappeared. You told me
did.
not to disappear. You told me not to disappear on you, and then I did it anyway. So sorry.
You came back.
Internet's a problem. So I've got a question here from Tracy. It says we have an LO who wants to create his own lead generation campaign via Facebook and send a link that asks a question in a chat box format to move people to action. Thoughts? or maybe isn't. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I see this all the time. And there's an automated feature with Facebook where even if the person's not on the account, the chat box pops up automatically. I think you just flip a switch. Yay. And I would say that proceed with caution, because very often social media comes with a messenger aspect. And this is true even if there isn't a pop-up chat box, where maybe your LO is talking about a specific product, or I'm going to be at this open house, and then they get an Instagram, personal message into their inbox. And that's fine. You're out on social media and consumers are trying to communicate with you. You're trying to make those connections. That's one of the points of social media. But after that first connection is made, the LO should do their best to redirect the consumer into more protected portals. I'm so glad, Tony, that you're interested in learning more about the open house this weekend. I'd love to discuss financing options with you. Here's my email. Just shoot me a quick email. We can outline that better and talk about options for you. Because a lot of these portals are not protected. You need to be able to pull them back into the different paths that you as a lender have allowed for that communication.
We have a question from Emily that asks about your favorite Facebook Live events. So we have an LO who's interested in doing a weekly 3 to 5 minute Facebook Live event where the LO could cover a different topic. What advice would you share on something like this?
Yes. So for those who might not be aware, very often social media has that messenger portal for that communication. But there's also newly evolving, it seems like everyone's coming out with it now, is some sort of live broadcast where a video is available for a short time and then it's very often gone and not recorded. So to that point, we call that disposable social media, where it's there and then it isn't. And to that point, very often LOs want to take advantage of that. And that is great, that they want to promote the brand. It's a free tool. They should. It's my advice that if they want to do this, it might be a little bit more legwork for you, but they should have some sort of script outlined for here's what I'm going to talk about. If questions about this come in, I'll address them in this way. If any other questions outside of the scope come in, I'll say, oh, I'd love to discuss that with Tony at a little bit later. Why don't you send me an email and we'll discuss it, especially
directing
exactly, so that they're not on the spot and making promises they necessarily can't keep, or so they're not messing anything up. And reviewing that script ahead of time, especially if it's only 3 to 5 minutes. But I do caution you must be very careful with video content, especially like that, because we have seen, different LOs go out and they make all kinds of claims that are not necessarily true because they're on the spot. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, and just because you think it's gone, it's not gone. Yeah. Because someone else is recording it.
Somebody's recording it, and then then the BBB.
Right. Right. Exactly. Great, and thank you guys so much for the questions. Keep them coming.
Yeah.
We want to keep Melissa on her toes because we are recording. I'm just kidding. So we kind of went through. We talked about complaints a little bit, and if I missed this, I apologize when I dropped off. But how should a lender deal with complaints on social media?
Sure. This is somewhat sticky because I will say, and I'm sure that most lenders who might be on here in the audience have seen this themselves, that not all complaints are truthful, weirdly. Sometimes, they're speculative, or they're completely wrong, or they're for the title company. It's not even connected to you, but now it's on your page. So, my first advice is to take things with a grain of salt and really remember what the point of responding is. It's definitely not to say, hey, consumer, you're a liar, or that never happened, or that's the title company. The point is to show other consumers in the future that you're not just going to say, tough, good luck, that you care about how your consumers feel and how your customers did with the process with you. So remember that really this is advertising for future consumers. So first and foremost, we have templates here at Activecomply that say, here's an idea of how you might want to respond, and you're welcome to take from that as you may. But something might be, I'm so sorry that you had this type of experience with such and such an LO. We would love to hear more about the circumstances of this complaint. You can most definitely reach out to so-and-so here at this email or at this phone number. And what we hear from time to time is, a lender has gone out of their way and they've done that already, and they haven't had any response because maybe it's not a legitimate comment or complaint. So included within that, I might say something like, we've attempted to reach you, a couple of different times via your phone number and via the email that you left. We'd love to really discuss this to see, what went wrong, to show that you've attempted to make that interaction as well. And one other item to keep in mind is that who is responding to these complaints? Do you have a customer service rep? Are you allowing the LO to do so directly? In which case, maybe take a look at that and decide, is that what we want included in our risk tolerance level? So basically the point would be to standardize it. Have some templates worked up for different issues that you see from time to time. Make sure you have somebody who is training to respond to these particular complaints, and make sure that all of them are recorded within your system. At Activecomply, we collect all of the social media complaints and store them for you. We archive what corrective action you took to discuss that complaint with the consumer. So having some sort of similar process, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or something to document the complaints, your responses, all of that is important for each lender.
That makes sense. And it is important to respond because that's what you're showing, right? That you are responsive.
Yeah.
So that's important. Okay, so a business versus personal page.
Yes. So at Activecomply, we get this question a lot because, as we mentioned earlier, so much of social media is intertwined, personal and business. You may have a Twitter
and you
account.
Want that, right? I mean, you want, because it makes you feel more authentic, which is what you need to be.
And so many LOs have built up their book of business over the years, where they have 2,000 friends that they've made through the course of their career. And one particular issue that we see all the time is particularly with Facebook, where I've built up this really great following. I don't want to give up the book of business, but if you have a personal Facebook account, you don't have the necessary tools to necessarily be compliant. One example is that if I, Melissa, have a personal Facebook profile, I can't put my NMLS ID in my name because I'm supposed to be a person, not a business. And so there's not supposed to be any numbers unless you're Elon Musk's son, in which case there are a couple numbers there, only numbers. But the majority of us don't have numbers. So that's one example where it's really difficult to be compliant there. There's also no website link per se. There's just an about section. There's no privacy policy spot. There's no address that you can put on there for your branch. So while you could necessarily do those things and throw them all into your personal section, it's really difficult to manage that compliance. It's also really difficult to monitor based on their privacy settings. So there's a lot of difficulties with personal versus business. One of the really cool things about Facebook is that they have this feature where you can duplicate the personal profile, convert it into a business page, and all your friends come over as followers automatically. So they still get their book of business, right, that they've worked so hard to develop, but now they get all this great business analytics that they never had before. Who's looking at my posts? For how long? The interactions, which were the most popular. So there's great reasons for them to do it for compliance, but there's benefits to them as salespeople too that they probably didn't think about before. So that's one way to overcome that situation. The only other profile social media that makes a distinction between business versus personal is Instagram. And this is because Instagram is now owned by the same company as Facebook. So they're really expanding that business versus personal market. I'm sure we've all seen Mark Zuckerberg looking a little nervous in front of Congress, right? So they've tightened up that API, trying to protect consumers, versus businesses that could be advertised to. So to that point, now Instagram, instead of having two separate profiles, one business page and one personal profile like they do on Facebook, Instagram just has the profile, and then there's a little switch that you turn on. It's called a toggle that says, hey, I now want all these business analytics. So being able to do that means you'll be able to add in an address and some other items that you wouldn't have been able to before. So again, there are benefits, but those are really the two big ones that make that distinction. Now, to that point, all Twitters are the same. All YouTubes are the same. So if somebody has a Twitter, I would guarantee that some of those posts were really personal in the beginning. We recently saw one Twitter where, the LO branch manager, he's got his NMLS ID. And one of the first posts that was on there was where he was cursing out Ticketmaster for their fees. So, and there's his NMLS ID, and I feel him. I get it. But at the same time,
it's like, oh yeah,
we're all upset. All of us are sighing right now. We're like, oh God, yeah, you're right. But there's a time, there's a place. Why is your NMLS ID up there? If you want to have a personal Twitter and a business Twitter, to make that distinction, you can make a whole new account. That's totally fine too. But knowing that you'll see that from time to time, and maybe you have to have that conversation with your employees about what's appropriate from a business standpoint.
Well, and that's kind of a part of our next question is, what are the concerns? What should they be looking for appropriate social media content?
Sure. And this gets somewhat sticky because now we're talking about free speech, and each state has really specific laws about this. So I would advise, people to definitely consult general counsel when you find a sticky issue with one of your employees before deciding how to proceed. One of the ways that Activecomply helps have that brand protection as opposed to just regulatory compliance is we have an inappropriate scan that our system does. So that means we're looking for verbiage that's more related to bigotry or substance use or violence. We had a really busy year this past year because we turned on quite a few political terms. So about political parties, it was an election year. And what an LO might feel might not be representative of your brand. And I think that very often lenders are like, that's up to them. I'm going to let them do what they want. And that's completely up to you as well. That's dependent on how you feel with your risk tolerance level. Some other lenders want to see all of it, want to make sure that they're not representing one side or multiple sides, because all money spends the same, right? It doesn't matter if it's red or blue money. And they want to just be open to consumers. So, we had quite a busy year around that, and we've always allowed our lender partners to opt in. We never force it on anybody, just like we had some current event triggers that we turned on for January 6th when there were the events in DC. I mean, I've never used the word insurrection before in my adult life, but suddenly we developed that list, and we asked our lender partners, would you want this? Just know that we have it available. And we got a resounding yes. Turn it on right now, please. So, we do our best to stay on the cusp of regulatory compliance, but also to be aware of everything else that could be damaging to the brand. I don't think any lender wants to be the first one on the front page of the newspaper for a fair lending issue. Nobody wants to be the example for this administration, especially.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of this administration, and before I go into that question, I just want to remind everybody that please feel free to drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we will address those. We've got about 5 more minutes, give or take, to talk with Melissa. So now would be the time to ask those questions if you have them. No question is a bad question, and just appreciate you guys being engaged. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
So the new administration. This is 2021. So can you speak to kind of what the new administration means to the mortgage industry?
Sure. So, one of the pillars of the new administration is definitely going to be fair lending, making sure there's no discrimination. That was the platform that was mentioned. And I think they're going to hold true to that promise, that they're going to be on the lookout for fair lending violations in ways maybe it wasn't done before. So one example that we've heard time and time again is, what's the photos that's being used in your advertising? Is there diversity in the people being reflected in your advertisements? Or are you catering to one particular class of people over and over again? What kind of argument does that make for fair lending? Who are you excluding potentially? What's the feeling some borrowers might get who might not want to do business with you? So thinking about fair lending in ways that maybe hadn't occurred before. So first and foremost, being aware of, what you're advertising, and having some variance, most certainly, especially based on where you're at as an LO. So if all the LOs in one particular region have the same, cover photo with the same idyllic family, that could be a fair lending issue red flag for a regulator. So that's why it's important to keep those things in mind. One other pillar that's definitely going to be at the forefront is making sure that consumers are taken care of in regards to forbearance. So making sure that there's no deceptive practices around forbearance. So a great way to see that consumer LO interaction in ways you never could before is through social media. Is your LO talking about forbearance? Do they know the implications of talking about forbearance? Do you do your own servicing? Have you given them any training? Do you have a routing process for those forbearance concerns? If not, it's a little bit late, but you should probably make one. So to that point, being aware of those two really big topics going into this administration would be who. And again, nobody wants to be the example. And I think that very often we hear the discussion of new administrations and the switch of parties and which one favors regulation more, who's going to do the crackdown more. And we see that it very likely would be somebody like this administration. We also know that the head of the CFPB, the new appointee, is somebody who really went hard for student loans and making sure that those student loan offerings were fair for consumers. And so we've heard interviews where they've talked about how this is going to definitely be something that they drive home when it comes to home financing and residential lending.
Excellent. Well, and how can lenders utilize technology to lessen the burden? I mean, we've talked about all of the different things that they need to be focused on. I mean, just an infinite number of things that they need to be paying attention to. So how can technology lessen that burden?
Sure. We talked about Activecomply, and we're really proud of our service and our offerings. And we know that the way that the mortgage industry is moving, there has to be some level of automation in every department in a mortgage company for it to really succeed in the future. And it's not to eliminate jobs. It's to, make sure that the people that you have on your staff are being utilized in the best way. Maybe it's for that, customer relations, as opposed to going through grunt work that could be done by some AI, right? So sometimes it's about repurposing and not about removing jobs. But there's all kinds of softwares out there that have, brand protection out there. So there's something for listening where you can just have a program listen to any instance of your brand out there in the ether that is the World Wide Web to find out, is there anybody complaining about this or this realtor website where they list me or my particular LO? So there are listening sites out there, as well as social media monitoring, like something that we offer, so that you'll know when your own staff is making claims. And so you can capture those issues before they become an issue, and being prepared for regulatory audits at the same time. So we know they're coming. They're not going to stop. Any lender, is in 3, 4, 7 audits, depending on the day, right? And so this can be one way that you can lessen that burden, is knowing that you have software to extract what you need in a timely manner.
And then you got a shout out from Tracy. Tracy says that we use you and love you. Makes sense. And you make our life so much easier. Plus, they give us credibility when they're telling our LOs no.
And we try to make it yes as much as we can. We're saying no, but here's an alternative, because the goal is to get that LO buy-in to some point, to make sure everybody's on the same page. And if you're just saying no, they don't believe you. But if you say no because they're way more understanding.
Yeah. Well, and then I know that you guys have some material that's very helpful to lenders in all of the different topics that we've talked about. You want to talk a little bit about the material?
Sure. So, and just yesterday we launched this. We made a state record retention requirements geomap on our website that says, Nevada says hold on to it forever. California says 3 years. Florida says 3 years. So that you as a lender could review that and know what the requirements are for you on those. We also have a social media compliance cheat sheet for LOs, because again, we want them to feel comfortable using social media without fear of losing their license, right? So the cheat sheet gives them really clear do's and don'ts, without blowing their mind. So we have that. We also have help docs around how do I get this defunct account taken care of? What's the process? Who do I talk to? What's the link? What documents will I have to provide? We know that social media compliance is somewhat niche, but can do a lot of damage So we know that lender partners are busy with other things. We hope to make social media at least one aspect of compliance really easy.
Excellent. And we have one more question from Megan. And this is, what's the because for us shutting down, so to speak, the LO's legacy websites they maintain domains for? This is a conversation that they've had trouble with.
And you know, what I'm imagining, and this is what we see from time to time, is it's somebody who's had this website for 15 years, and you know, they've always had it no matter what lender they're at. And so what we like to tell, lender partners to help reinforce it is that that's totally fine. You can keep that website URL, but maybe it reroutes to, one of the company domain pages. Or if you're going to keep this because you're a top producer and we ever so often allow it just because, if you make that decision as a lender, that's fine. Just know that you can add it to, a monitoring service like Activecomply and keep up with any changes that happen on it. I would say that if they're going to keep that website, it should have a full compliance review, and it should also, reroute to your application portal. Find out where is it sending the consumers? Does it go to some fillable Google form? That is problematic. So, the pushback I think is always going to be there, but the because is most definitely because, well, what information is being collected from the consumer? Do you have the money to make a protection portal affiliated with your website? You know what, let's take over that for you. We pay to make sure our services are protected. So having the becauses when it comes to compliance, consumer protection, things like that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Melissa Thomas, Head of Compliance with Activecomply. We really appreciate you taking your time and sharing your expertise with us today. Social media, it's always changing. Everybody needs it. Everybody wants it. Everybody's on it. So it's certainly something that your information is definitely helpful, so I appreciate that. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you for all of the great questions. If you have other questions for Melissa, please feel free to reach out, and we will get that information over to her. So thank you guys very much for joining us for TMC Connect today. And Melissa, thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate it. Everybody have
Thanks
a great
so
rest of
much.
your week.
Had a great hoot of a time.
Thank
See
you.
you all later.
We did too. Bye.
Bye.